By November 1943, the Reich Air Ministry on Wilhelmstrasse had become a building where ambitious specifications arrived in the morning and died quietly by evening, buried beneath requisition failures, material shortages, and the compounding arithmetic of a war consuming faster than German industry could produce. And it was in this atmosphere of institutional exhaustion that General Luftzeugmeister Erhard Milch, seated at a desk cluttered with production reports from Messerschmitt, Heinkel, and Focke-Wulf, received the updated assessment from the Technisches Amt that would formally authorize what engineers at Junkers had been quietly proposing for nearly 8 months: a 4-engine heavy bomber capable of striking England's industrial heartland, the Soviet rear echelon supply infrastructure, and the American staging bases being constructed along the North African littoral. A machine that Germany did not have the time, the aluminum, or the undamaged factory floor to build from scratch, but which might be assembled from what already existed, from the fractured body parts of other aircraft already in production. A philosophy of construction that was not innovation so much as desperation formalized into engineering doctrine. The aircraft that would emerge from this directive was designated the Junkers Ju-488, and its conception was not born of triumph, but of a specific and traceable crisis: the destruction of the Heinkel He-177, Germany's only operational heavy bomber, which had earned among its own crews the sardonic nickname Reichsfeuerzeug, the Reich's cigarette lighter, owing to its coupled DB606 engines, 2 power plants mechanically joined to drive a single propeller shaft, an arrangement that generated heat and vibration enough to ignite fuel lines, hydraulic fluid, and wing spars with a reliability that made the aircraft nearly as dangerous to its own airmen as to its enemies. And by mid-1943, after the disastrous performance of Heinkel He-177 units over Stalingrad and the Atlantic, Milch had grown cold toward the design, cold enough to authorize a parallel program that would draw on existing Junkers airframes and avoid the coupled engine catastrophe entirely. The Ju-488 would be built around 4 separate Junkers Jumo 213A engines, each developing 1,750 horsepower at takeoff thrust, mounted individually on a new high-aspect wing whose design borrowed structural geometry from the Ju-288, a medium bomber program that had already consumed 3 years of development before being quietly canceled in favor of more immediately producible types. And the fuselage would be largely derivative of the Ju-188, the refined successor to the ubiquitous Ju-88, meaning that tooling, jigs, skilled labor, and subcontracted component supply chains already existed, already functioned, already turned out usable metal, and could in theory be redirected without the 18-month retooling delay that a genuinely new aircraft would require. This was the theory. In practice, the Ju-488 program would be assigned to the Junkers facility at Toulouse in occupied France, a location chosen not because it was ideal, but because it retained functional hangar space and a workforce of French laborers who continued to show up, under duress, under surveillance, and occasionally under the quiet direction of networks the Sicherheitsdienst had not yet fully mapped, and whose hands would be the ones actually riveting, cutting, and fitting the components of an aircraft that German engineers designed in offices in Dessau and transmitted south via courier and encrypted Fernschreiben. The Toulouse facility had been the pre-war home of WWII, producing elegant monoplane fighters for the Armée de l'Air, and the building still carried the smell of French aluminum primer beneath the newer, harsher scent of German synthetic lubricants, a sensory archaeology of occupation that the French workers moved through daily without acknowledgement, their faces neutral, their hands precise, their thoughts their own. 6 prototypes were authorized under the November directive, V1 through V6, with V1 and V2 designated for static structural testing, V3 and V4 for powered flight trials, and V5 and V6 reserved for weapons and systems integration. An optimistic schedule that assumed no Allied interference, no material disruption, no sabotage, and a rate of component delivery from Junkers subcontractors in Bernburg, Leipzig, and Halberstadt that the German rail network, under RAF Bomber Command's increasingly accurate night attacks, was already struggling to guarantee. Milch signed the authorization on a Thursday afternoon with a fountain pen whose ink had run low, the last strokes of his signature visibly fading, a detail noted by his adjutant in the margin of the file copy and later recovered by Allied intelligence following the occupation of Berlin. A small and human detail embedded in the documentation of a machine that would never fly in anger, never drop a single bomb in operational service, never alter the strategic arithmetic of a war that was already, though few in that building would admit it, becoming irreversible. The winter of 1944 had left the Toulouse basin gray and damp into March, the Garonne running high with snowmelt from the Pyrenees, the air above Francazal aerodrome carrying the particular cold of a continental spring that had not yet decided to arrive. And inside Hangar 7 of the former WWII facility, illuminated by suspended industrial lamps that cast yellow pools across the concrete floor, the first physical components of Junkers Ju-488 V1 were being assembled by a workforce of approximately 240 French laborers, supervised by 31 German engineers and 6 Luftwaffe technical oversight officers, whose primary qualification appeared to be the ability to read Junkers drawings and communicate displeasure in French they had learned badly, their pronunciation drawing the same flat expressions from the workers that everything else drew, expressions that conveyed nothing and concealed everything. The components arriving at Toulouse were not purpose-built for the Ju-488, but were instead sections of other aircraft redirected at the component stage before final assembly. The rear fuselage sections came from Ju-188 production lines in Bernburg, already drilled and framed for the Ju-188's bomb bay configuration and requiring modification at the bulkhead stations to accept the Ju-488's wider center section. The forward fuselage was a lengthened Ju-188 nose modified to accommodate a revised glazed bombardier position with an MG-131 defensive mount on a flexible ring, a 13mm weapon whose ammunition feed required a new channel cut through the forward pressure frame, a modification that added 11 days to V1's assembly schedule and generated a formal written complaint from the Technisches Amt representative, Diplom engineer Werner Hartmann, whose reports back to Dessau grew progressively shorter and more precise as the winter progressed and the gap between the authorized schedule and the actual one widened without explanation. The wing was the most complex element, a completely new structure spanning 31.6 meters with a root core deep enough to allow partial internal fuel tankage, the leading edge housing the oil cooler inlets for the 4 Jumo 213A engines, and the main spar running through a center section carry-through box that had been fabricated in Leipzig at the Erla facility and arrived in Toulouse on a flat car in late February, having sustained minor transport damage to one of the upper spar cord flanges, a crack 140 millimeters long that required a doubler plate repair before installation, a repair that was authorized, executed, and documented, but whose documentation would later be examined by Junkers quality inspectors, who noted that the repair had been made with rivets of slightly incorrect pitch spacing, whether through error or intention never formally determined, the French worker assigned to the task having given his name as Henri Moreau, an identity that French resistance records from the Haute-Garonne département would later suggest was not his legal name, though by the time this was investigated, the aerodrome had changed hands entirely. The four Jumo 213A engines were delivered as sealed units from the Junkers Motorenwerke at Magdeburg, each crated in wooden frames with moisture-absorbing paper packed around the accessory section. Each weighed 930 kilograms with accessories and exhaust manifolds, and the process of lifting them into their nacelles on the new wing required a mobile crane whose hydraulic seals had begun to weep fluid in the cold, slowing engine installation to 1 unit per day rather than the planned 2. And the sound of the crane motor, a flat diesel clattering that echoed off the hangar's steel roof, became the dominant sound of march at Francazal, punctuating shifts, marking hours, audible in the adjacent administrative building where the German officers ate their meals from field rations, supplemented by whatever the local economy would yield, which in the spring of 1944 was not much, the occupation having by then extracted nearly everything extractable from the Languedoc. Beyond the hangar, the larger war was becoming audible in ways that technical schedules did not accommodate. On the nights of March 7th and 8th, RAF Bomber Command dispatched Lancaster and Halifax formations against Toulouse itself, targeting the rail yards and the aviation industrial complex at Blacagnac, 6 kilometers to the northwest. And though Francazal was not directly struck, the detonations were close enough that the hangar's roof panels vibrated, small cascades of dust falling from the structural connections onto the partially assembled V1 fuselage. The French workers pausing their tasks and looking upward with expressions the German supervisors chose not to examine closely. The sound of the bombs arriving first as pressure changes in the ears before the acoustics followed, a low sequential concussion that traveled through the concrete floor and up through the souls of every person standing on it, a reminder that what was being assembled inside was not separate from what was happening outside, but was in fact the reason for it. By the first week of July 1944, 6 weeks after the Allied landings at Normandy had transformed the strategic geography of Western Europe from a theoretical threat into an operational reality, advancing southward through the bocage at a rate that German Army Group B's situation maps could no longer minimize, the U-488 program at Toulouse existed in a condition that its official documentation still described as proceeding toward schedule, while its physical condition told a different story. Prototype V1, the most advanced of the 6 authorized airframes, was approximately 85% structurally complete, its fuselage mated to the center section wing carry-through, its 4 Jumo 213A engines installed in their nacelles and fitted with exhaust stacks, its undercarriage legs in place but lacking final hydraulic connections, its cockpit glazing fitted but not yet sealed, the aircraft sitting on its own reels for the first time in late June with a static weight of approximately 22,000 kilograms unloaded, a physical presence in the hangar that represented 3 years of German bomber development theory, 18 months of component diversion from other programs, and a specific number of French workers whose cooperation had been compelled by the machinery of occupation, and whose sabotage had been incremental, deniable, and effective. V2 was structurally less complete, its wing center section still awaiting the arrival of outer panel assemblies that had been loaded onto a rail freight consist at Bernburg on 12 June and had not been seen since, the consist having entered the French rail network at a moment when resistance activity against rail infrastructure had reached a tempo that the German Transport Authority's own internal reports described using the word unbeherrschbar, uncontrollable, a word that appeared with increasing frequency in documents generated that summer. On the morning of July 16, 1944, a Sunday, at approximately 0420 hours Central European Time, 2 aircraft of the United States Army Air Force's 15th Air Force, operating from bases in southern Italy and conducting a photographic reconnaissance sweep over southern France as part of the broader interdiction intelligence effort supporting Operation Dragoon, passed over Toulouse-Francazal at 28,000 feet in clear pre-dawn conditions. Their F-5 Lightning variants, P-38s modified with cameras replacing armament. Their oblique cameras recording the aerodrome in the long shadows of early morning light. The images capturing clearly the outline of Hangar 7, the shadow geometry of the partially disassembled roof panels, and what the subsequent photo interpretation report at Caserta described as one large unidentified multi-engine aircraft fuselage, incomplete, of heavy bomber configuration, estimated wingspan exceeding 30 meters. The report was forwarded to the Combined Strategic Targets Committee within 48 hours, but the decision about whether to strike Francazal specifically was overtaken by events, because on the night of July 18, 1944, elements of the French resistance network operating under the coordination of a British Special Operations Executive Circuit, network name redacted in available documents, entered the facility through a drainage access point in the northwestern perimeter fence, moved through the aerodrome in darkness, the ground wet from an afternoon rain that had left the grass soft and the puddles reflective under the quarter moon, their footsteps absorbed by the mud, their actions completed in under 40 minutes. The V-1 airframe was set alight using thermite incendiary compound placed at the wing root fuel connection points and the engine accessory sections, the fire taking hold in the nacelle areas first, the aluminum alloy structure burning with a white-hot intensity that illuminated the hangar interior through the roof vents and was visible from the Toulouse city center as an orange glow against the overcast, reported by German observation posts as fire at Francazal facility. Cause unknown, fire suppression in progress. Suppression that was not in progress and would not succeed because the thermite had done what thermite does, and the Jumo 213A engine's magnesium alloy components were feeding the combustion from within the nacelles, the heat cracking the newly fitted windscreen glazing and causing the undercarriage legs, whose hydraulic pressure had never been fully charged, to partially collapse under the distortion of their aluminum cylinders. The aircraft settling asymmetrically onto the hangar floor with a sound described by a French worker who witnessed it from outside as a long, slow groan, less like metal failing than like something large and tired finally lying down. V-2 burned the following night under circumstances that German security reports attributed to continuation of resistance activity, with what seems, reading between the terse lines of the available German documentation, like a weary and accurate assessment. The remaining 4 prototype airframes, still in component form at various stages of assembly, were formally cancelled by directive from the Reich Luftfahrtministerium on August 6, 1944, signed by a junior official rather than Milk, who had by then been removed from his position following a series of conflicts with Göring and Speer. The cancellation order 3 sentences long, the language bureaucratic, the implication final. The U-488 program was closed, its resources, what remained of them, to be redistributed to jet aircraft development and the Volksjäger emergency fighter program. The heavy bomber concept shelved, not because Germany had solved its strategic bombing problem, but because the strategic situation had progressed to a stage where the concept of a German heavy bomber striking England or the Soviet rear was no longer a military calculation, but an abstraction. A document in a file in a building in Berlin that Allied forces would enter in the spring of the following year and find largely intact, the papers undisturbed, the specifications still legible, describing in precise engineering language an aircraft that the war had consumed before it could be used, assembled from spare parts and returned, in smoke, in thermite flame, in the quiet footsteps of saboteurs on a wet July night, to something very close to the spare parts it had come from.